University Debating Championship 2024. In opening government, we have Sanata Dharma. Opening opposition, we have Bina Nusantara. Closing government, Universitas Diponegoro. And closing opposition, Universitas Sumatera Utara. Judging in today's debate will be, my name is Revaldi Wirabuana, and I'm accompanied by Marcia, Dimas Dwi Fadli, Hari Widi Utomo, SPD MED, and Selomita Maria Serafion Bole. As a general reminder for everyone, this room will be live streamed, so always keep yourself close to the microphone when you're giving your speech, as well as when you're delivering your POI, all right? Okay, as per the rule, please maintain the quorum and maintain equity conduct at all times. Without further ado, the motion before this House is this House regrets humanity's obsession with anti-senescence. I call upon Prime Minister to start the debate. Here.
Thank you. Check. Okay. Allow me to set up my timer. Name is Sean. Preferred pronouns are he, him. Okay. We live in a world where obsession is where humans try to reach a certain standard. This manifests itself in numerous ways. We look at the current status quo. It can be wealth. It can be beauty. It is important for us to notice when we obsess over something, the important question becomes, is this worth obsessing? And is the nature of this obsession is harmful or actually beneficial for the human race? And here in opening government, we would like to claim that this obsession towards anti-senescence is inherently harmful. Why? Firstly, we have to characterize why exactly are people generally obsessed with anti-senescence, right? They're obsessed because of one thing, because of death, and death is scary, which is completely natural. However, why exactly does this obsession actually manifest itself into something that is harmful? It is because they believe that other than death, right, they're afraid of the passing of time, they're afraid they're going to go older, they're afraid that it's going to perhaps make them not look as youthful in their prime condition whatsoever. Because in the current status quo, what is exactly the prime standard of beauty? That is actually youth. Now, why exactly is this standard of beauty in being youth actually bad? Because not everyone can capitalize on it, right? Even in the current status quo, people who, let's say, for example, they do plastic surgery, or people who try to get like, I don't know, make their skin like do detox and whatnot, those are people who have capital, right? Those who have the resources to actually do that. Now, why exactly then this sort of like obsession towards anti-senescence, which is the field of research which is focusing exactly on what we talk about, the declining of aging of cells, right, is harmful? Because when not everyone can capitalize on that, and when this actually becomes the standard, only those who are privileged enough to obtain this can gain its benefits. In turn, what is the comparative to those who cannot actually get their hands into this anti-senescence? They become the talking point, right? People who cannot actually fit into these standards that is only created because humans are so obsessed with anti-senescence in the first place. Now, and again, this reason of obsession is also inherently harmful because it tells everyone, it gives everyone the narrative of what actually matters in your life, what actually defines you, and that it becomes that you must look like or you must appear like your prime years, and that is something under government side of the house we really oppose. Now, secondly as well is that we also believe that the obsession towards anti-senescence is very regrettable because it takes the focus away from issues that are actually inherently critical. In this regard, why? Because death by old age or old age itself is something that is natural, right? Every living being in the world, or we can argue maybe crocodiles don't do that, actually it happens to everyone, right? This is something that is natural, it is a natural thing. Because it is a natural thing, because it is something that gives uniformity to everyone, it is something that is worth celebrating because all of us actually relate to this particular case. Comparatively, what are some other issues that needs to be actually tackled upon in the current status quo? It is the wars, the poverty, the kind of the hunger, right? This is an unnatural thing. This happens because there are issues or anomalies that disrupts the natural order, people not being able to actually live towards the average lifespan that they should be. And again, because of humanity's obsession with anti-senescence, which we claim will actually divert that sort of focus, in turn, people will actually look more towards, I love so much that there's this technology that allows me to look young, while not really taking into consideration that there are some people who cannot even live past this sort of ideal youth or prime age that everyone is obsessing about. In that regard, it also, I think, is important to clarify, panels here, that we do not deny the fact we are not trying to deny the fact that there could be some potential health benefits with the progression of anti-senescence, right? But what we are regretting in this debate is not exactly anti-senescence itself in terms of its technical, biological or chemical aspects, but it is what exactly humanist obsession is going to do with this sort of technology. So in that regard, the burden on the opposition side of the House to actually prove to us all why exactly humanity's obsession will allow them to do something better, to give something productive, and to return something that is positive for the human race. Now in this regard, is there any POI coming from closing before I continue into my last substantive? Going once, going twice, going thrice. Okay, so what exactly will it look like under our world where humanity's obsession towards anti-senescence doesn't exist, right? One is that we do not enforce or we do not actually empower the current narrative where a youth or the beauty is something that everyone must pursue and everyone must maintain, right? Why does this exist? This exists until we look at the commercialization, we look at the magazines, we look at media in general. About when you look at advertisements about beauty, what do you see? You see prime age, right? You see youth. Rarely do you ever see someone celebrating looks as in people who are already in their elderly stage of their life or people who are older. And in this regard, when humanist obsession with anti-senescence actually takes form, this will only be strengthened under opposition side of the House, and under our side of the House, sure, maybe at the worst case scenario, what happens is what is happening with the current status quo, but that is still better because even then, everyone still has the same lingering issue of death, and it is something that is equal, it is something that that uniforms all of us, it is a struggle that all of us as humanity can relate to and can struggle with together. Comparatively, under opposition side of the House, this is something that those who do not have the resources to capitalize on will only will only receive the harms and will not reap any sort of benefits whatsoever, and that is not a kind of society or a kind of world that we under opening government would like to live in. So in this regard, what happens under our side of the House is that we maintain, sure, at the worst case scenario is that these particular harms may still happen, but it is not worsened by the fact of what happens under under opposition side of the House. Comparatively, let's engage with opposition side of the House's best case in this debate, right? Opposition side of the House best case is, sure, let's say maybe in a very big hypothetical that let's say anti-senescence allows human to be pretty much immortal, or they are able to live far longer than their average lifespan. In this regard, what happens? It creates this kind of dystopian society where those who live longer and who have a more youthful appearance are actually attributed or regarded highly more in society comparatively to those who don't. And we say that this is something that is inherently wrong because of two things. One, it is already against the natural order of things, and it breaks this kind of uniformity of humanity being bounded by the same lingering fate that is death. And secondly, as well, that it enforces this kind of narrative of beauty standard, or the standard of value being youth, which not everyone have the privilege or the resources to actually capitalize on. As opening government, we are so proud to propose. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that speech. I would like to call the leader of opposition.
Okay. Is this loud enough? Yeah, thank you. Gender pronoun, she or her. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What OG fails to explain in this debate is how the regret in itself looks like, right? We don't think that it would be something very small, like, oh, you should embrace yourself more. No, it comes with the shaming of the people that is robbed of their childhood, that is robbed of their youth, because they are simply fighting in war, for example, because they just simply want to know that they could live longer to see their children grow up, see their children have grandchildren, have a longer lifespan, be more youthful because they want to be with their loved ones. This robs these people's agency at the very first place to choose the thing that they can do with their life. First, OG claims about limited capital, right? But only when there is obsession, and it's exclusively when there's obsession, there's more urgency for companies, for example, or institutions to create more accessible technology. Things like 20 years ago, plastic surgery isn't really accessible to most people, right? Whereas now, people are no longer shamed for it because people just simply know that some people have deformities that they want to fix. For example, they want to fix their confidence and those type of stuff. People respect those agencies, and thus this obsession creates the urgency for the companies and these institutions to create more innovations that is inherently going to be more accessible, which flips the entire case of accessibility that OG says. But firstly, on a few clarifications, right? What does the generalization here looks like? The generalization here is that on their side, that a person being more happy if they're more youthful, and if they do not embrace themselves aging or becoming old, it means that it's bad, right? This means that the people who want to stay youthful for their confidence or want to have a longer health span to be able to grow as healthy as possible, to be able to see their children getting married and those other stuff won't even exist, right? We want people to be aware of anti-senescence, and this obsession is the exclusive thing that you need in order for people to be aware of the discussions inside of it, right? What does this discussion looks like? This looks like, oh, anti-senescence have its side effects. Things like, for example, if you take this anti-senescence, there's side effects of illnesses, for example, and those other stuff. And the urgency of these people's obsession is going to create those urgency for these companies to create anti-senescence in the field of research to become more advanced in the future, right? And there is a push from the public for these companies to develop it to the best that they can. Comparatively on their side, people who still want to look youthful, people who still want to have a longer lifespan simply because they do not have the choice to not do so, would not even have this access to it at the very first place, right? Because the innovation and the advancement of it wouldn't even exist, right? So this is, and then firstly, moving on to my contributions, like firstly on the principle of choice. Humans are not born of choice, right? What your gender is, who your family is, the place that you are born in, you do not have a choice in that, right? Whether you have one parent when you're born, whether you're born with a single parent, those type of stuff really doesn't exist. Whether you are born in Ukraine, for example, at the time of war, you do not have that choice of being at that time, and you do not have the choice of that, right? So what we at least can do is give these people choice to do what they want with their life, right? What happens on government is that you shame the people for not wanting to be more youthful, for wanting to preserve their youth and have a longer life. Why is it then likely on their side for the form of regretting to be forms of shaming? First, the standard on your side is for people to embrace yourself growing old, right? Which means that the shaming takes away from people's agency of choice. If you do not embrace being old, you are not a good person. If you do not embrace being old, for example, you cannot go to heaven because you oppose God's making, for example. War veterans, for example, that couldn't enjoy the life that they have in their teenagers, just simply wants the choice for them to be able to live longer because they want to pursue the things that they want in life. They want to go to school, for example. They want to do a lot of things in their life that they couldn't do when they were younger, right? Why the counterfactual to tackle the rationality of people exists? Firstly, agendas like feminism. The agenda of feminism is there because they value the choice of these people, intersectionality and all that stuff, right? Embracing choice of what you may be, women supporting women, and those stuff. Things like, for example, like what I've said, plastic surgery. When you do it nowadays, people do not condemn you for it because people know that you are doing it because of it is your choice. And whatever you do with your body is your choice, right? Which means that no matter what the choice of that person, if that makes that person happier, if that makes the person quality of life better, being able to continue their life with much more happier outcome, with much happier outlook on life, not being bullied with by like the society, for example, because and it is completely justifiable, right? And then knowing that, for example, women are the one that is the most affected by these types of obsession, thus the agenda of choice and rationality already exists, and it will be pushed even further because this obsession of this exists. The obsession of it is the thing that will push this woman to become like, oh, are you really sure that you want to take this anti-senescence, for example, because I know it is your choice, I'm going to respect it, and those type of stuff, right? Whereas on their side, the thing that only happens is shaming, right? Because you need to embrace growing old or else you are bad. And then secondly, religion. Things like saying God's creation is sacred and death is inevitable. That's the thing that OG says about, oh, people are obsessed with anti-senescence because they are scared to die. Doesn't even really make sense, right? Because everyone knows that they will die. No one will think that they are immortal, right? They just want to preserve the amount of time that they have left, the amount of time that they could, for example, preserve 2 or 3 years more of their life just to enjoy the smaller things in life that they couldn't enjoy beforehand, right? Then the people's inherent rationality also exists. People are not obsessed with anti-senescence because they are inherently scared of death. That's why the things about, oh, people are, quote unquote, very bad for obsessing with anti-senescence because simply it is bad and they are not embracing their growing age, for example, doesn't even really make sense, right? And then secondly, it generalizes that people want to live more youthful, doesn't embrace being old is bad, right? Some people just simply have doesn't have any choice to do that, which means the harm on OG's side is standardization, but the harm on our side is much bigger. The net harm of these individuals and the harm of the society, the harm of the innovation of this research is going to be more accessible in the future, doesn't exist on government side. Proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Leader of Opposition. We call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Test. Okay, I hope I'm audible. Oh yeah, sure. Cool, I think this is fine, right? Obsession is only beneficial when it actually caters to everyone. The reason why a lot of people actually obsess about the feminist movement, the reason why people actually obsess about the LGBTQ movement, the reason why actually people obsess about the rising for like people's rights movements, etc., Black Lives Matter movements, is because it caters to everyone. When we actually obsess about this particular thing, you need to understand that the capita and the amount of people that could actually realize and to actually have the choices to actually realize these ability to actually take or partake in anti-Seneca is very limited. Therefore, we question in general, why should we obsess this when the amount of people that are catered, the amount of people that you could actually achieve these things are very limited. So then in the 20s, America's obsessions with money brought upon the great economic crash. Humanity's obsession with conquering brought upon the calamity to other living things. We concede that anti-senescence advantages are worthy of praise. However, principally, humanity's
obsession more often than not, when it doesn't cater to everyone, will actually harmful for most people in general, because the amount of people that can actually cater to this are very limited. So then we already tells you that human values in the opposition side of the house will, matrix judgment will only be based on two things: is that beauty, youth, and also the longevity of your life. This is quite harmful, and even if you're just talking about beauty and youth, you could already actually take it on our side of the house. Things such as plastic surgery, things such as skincare, things such as taking like medicine to actually make your appearance much more youthful are already accessible in our side of the house. This is already accessible for most people. Why do we need to take anti-senescence when your only main goal is to prolong human life? The opposition main case is to say that there is a loss of time that people actually get, and that this actually give them individual agency for them to actually relive their life, not only to relive their life, but actually experience more things in life. However, this is exactly harmful, because the narrative that you are not able to live a youthful life, and then you actually have the anti-senescence when you're like actually 80 years old, does not grant you youthful life in the first sense. Sure, you might actually see your granddaughter lives, you might actually see them and see them prosper in a much more longer life, but anti-senescence in general is actually prolonging your life, but there is no characterism on how this will actually give them energy. This will give them longevity, as in how will they be like not only a progressive human being, but how will they be able to actually maintain the level of youthness. Sure, you might live long, but how youthful are you? We question that, right? And then the feminist agenda in the first place, I'll take POI probably later. Feminist agenda is another point that opening oppositions bring. The biggest agenda of the feminist movement, and why feminist movement is on our side, is inclusivity. To accept every woman, no matter how your appearance may be, no matter how you look like, right? On our side of the house, inclusivity and encouragement that has happened time and time again in the status quo will be innovated way more. Why should we innovate a medicine when we actually could innovate the human mind to accept and to actually understand, right? And this actually touched upon the morality case to accept your body and your appearance, something that the feminist movement definitely champions. Therefore, feminist movement and basically social movement in general will be on our side, because they understand this caters to more people to actually just give encouragement, and the capita in general will not actually feasible for everyone. I will explain it. So then, too much narrative that existing in the status quo will muddle upon the obsession in general, because at this current status quo, there is a lot of narrative that people trying to achieve. Oh, we need to understand how economic works. Oh, we need to understand how our government works. Oh, we need to be more inclusive. We need to accept more people. See that this is not urgent at all. So what if you couldn't live a longer life? Everyone in general in the history of mankind usually does not have that capability anyways. Sure, you might actually like experience more things, but to what extent, and how, and why will people deem this as beneficial, other than just like looking at like children's growing up? We don't understand in general, because on my very own experience, even with the medical advancement that we have right now, my grandfathers, my nai, etc., even though we bring them to the hospital to give them the possibility, the chance to actually live a longer life, they still say this: I don't have any friends, it's just you and my families, I just want to meet my friends. I couldn't do a lot of things because sure, I live longer, but what can I do? I do not have the capability, I don't have the power. Everything that I do, even though I live a longer life, it is inherently with your actions. Therefore, it's okay for you to let me go. Therefore, even if there is agency, people will not choose this in general. Therefore, pushing the narrative that we should actually like obsess about this is not feasible at all, because in general, people will not think this as something that is worth going for. Nextly, they believe that obsession creates accessibility. But then, panels, I urge you to actually question this. Quality is the main thing that we still concern. Sure, because look in the status quo. Medical treatment that costs $10,000 does not comparatively is like the same with medical treatment that costs you $1,000. Sure, there might be accessibility. Sure, there is anti-senescence that will cost you $500. But what is the quality? Sure, how long is the longevity? Oh, just 2 months. Do you really think people will actually do this? The amount of people that actually have the amount of money to actually not only invest but mainly take in anti-Seneca are those who are powerful and rich. What about the 98% who are in the middle class and lower class? They does not have the capability for it. Sure, they said that you have the accessibility. Sure, you have the choice, but our choice are still limited. Our choice are not granted with the quality that they are giving to us. So then we still question this in general, right? This is exactly why we regret this. Sure, sure, you can glorify the agency of people whatsoever, but where is the uniformity? Because even if they have agency, even if they have the capability to actually choose, the set amount or the choices they could choose are still inherently very limited. Worst case, in our side of the house, what if people actually, in the obsession, because my main point is that people will actually be muddled down by this narrative, what if people actually listens? Sure, I actually wanted to invest on anti-Seneca. Sure, I actually want to partake in anti-Seneca. And they will actually listen and pay attention. The reach on those who will favor are still so limited that the obsessions become questionable. It will only cater to the wealthy and the financially capable. Because skincare and medicine that are most looked up to the general right now are still quite expensive, and even though right now it is much more accessible for them, why don't they just choose that when it is much more accessible for them? Why don't they just choose to partake in like drinking like medicine or like go to the health clinic for that if they wanted a chance for a better life? I think that is much more feasible and it is much more accessible than this daydream that all of this will actually grant you a longer life. Lastly, I will brought to you about morality. We do not regret whether any individual actually pursue beauty. We do not regret the narrative that health is a key importance for human life. However, all bents should understand and question through morality narrative whether it is moral to push such narrative where clearly such a breakthrough will be expensive, because innovation never will be easy to achieve by the general mass, proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. Now we call Deputy Leader Opposition.
Okay. Gender pronouns share her, and probably a bit of trigger warning because it's about life, and I hope it's not going to offend anyone. I think death is natural, but not everyone has the capacity to prepare yourself for aging or death, or even the close people that you are, that your close ones, your family, for example, for them to suddenly pass away during their death, for example, due to old age. I think those are the cases in which we think that anti-senescence is so important to make sure that at the very least, you have the agency to make sure that you have a longer lifespan, for example, to go with your family, to accompany your family, to have that closure to what embracing death is going to look like under OO's world, right? Because the fact that people are already deprived from the choice of birth, then at the very least, we grant you the agency to extend your lifespan or your physical appearances for you to become happier and more confident with yourself, for example, if it is in line with your interests, right? Because I think the obsession in itself is only for the people who actually wants to get these anti-senescence for themselves. It's not going to be like it's not going to be enforced to people who actually do not have the interest to actually have these procedures at the end of the day, right? Because life is always going to be unfair at the end of the day, that young children are currently suffering from cancer in hospitals, that dream to have a longer life, to accompany your family, to explore more of the world. It is very pitiful that these people and these children are disabled from all of these procedures exactly because OG tells you that, oh, people should just embrace the death exactly because you're already having cancers, for example, or you're already terminally ill and so on. I think without the obsession, OG is telling people to face the reality that death is coming to you and there is absolutely no way to go against it. Two main things to why that is going to be immoral, right? Firstly, we think this is immoral because there are multiple methods that the medical industry or the institutions can take to extend your lifespan, to grant you the access to a potentially better life, and so on. That is the reason why you need that obsession, so you have more medical procedures, for example, for these to become more accessible for the people, to have different types of treatment, for example, and for it to become safer and actually more advanced in the future, to make sure that the people are able to accommodate it, are going to be accommodated for these types of procedure. Because I think the counterfactual about embracing death and the natural decline that you have is already existing inside status quo, right? This is like how feminism exists to make sure that you actually embrace women for their natural decline, for example. Religion exists to remind people about the idea of death. So I think the entire establishment from OG that tries to tell you that people are not going to accept death is not going to be that charitable inside this debate, because I already told you that a lot of the counterfactuals already exist. So it's not about the idea of accepting death, but how the process of accepting death is going to be way better than under OO's world. So the obsession in itself exists not because people want to become immortal, or it's not going to be a sudden idea that emerges from your brain, but because there are demands for people to become more confident with your physical appearance, or the extension extension of your lifespan to actually make sure you have a better life at the end of the day, right? So under OO, we acknowledge that there is a demand, therefore the compliance for more innovation, for advanced technology, for example, safer procedure, cheaper alternative, and so on is already established from the moment my elders already told you in this debate, right? But secondly then, I think the alternative of plastic surgery or the medicine and skincare that comes from OG then is not exclusive then, because it doesn't run when it falls under the idea of anti-senescence to make sure that you're going to have a more youthful physical appearance, for example, you're going to have more medicine to make sure you live a healthier life and a longer lifespan at the end of the day. So that simply affirms to all of our case to how important it is to actually give people the agency for you to live a longer lifespan if people actually do have the interest to do so. What is the extension then under OO, right? We're going to talk about two things. Firstly, on how anti-senescence empower people with more choices, and secondly then about the acceptance of death. I think the premise is simple for the first argument. As unfortunate it is, I think aging could be a difficult process for people to understand, that people cannot immediately accept the fact that we're going to die at the end of the day and there's not going to be as much youthfulness inside your face at the end of the day, right? Because I think OG's biggest principle about choice is the most important one, because it flips OG's entire case about embracing death and so on. Because the end of the life will come, but OG gives you more time to accept it more naturally and more organically that comes from the people. Because firstly, I think the obsession of anti-senescence urges companies or even industry to become more competent in creating research for treatment against decline. This will get more treatment for people to look younger, similar to how cosmetic surgeries are currently like inside status quo, or there's more clinics, for example, for you to access all of these industries and access all of these methods as well, but more on the biological aspects of how it actually creates a safer procedure for people to access as well. That means A, we empower more people to make decisions for themselves and how it affects their life. Women oftentimes feel sad that they're no longer young and beautiful. They often get shamed by their husband or by society, for example, for how much wrinkles you have in your face comparatively to other women who are much younger than you, for example, right? I think the choice in and of itself of anti-senescence enables you to feel better for yourself, to actually feel more confident about yourself, and that is why it is so important, because these are the vulnerable actors that we need to protect inside status quo. But what does it look like that on government bench, right? Because OG never explained to you to what extent does regretting the obsession look like. We already told you that it looks like insulting women, insulting parents for not letting their child go, for example, right? It looks like insulting women to pursue youth, shaming them for their personal choices, even if it is already in line with their interests and it actually makes you feel better at the end of the day, right? Because it is your life, I think the establishment of choice in and of itself under OO should be the most important to make sure that there is agency that is provided for the people. So the weighings then, I think on the idea of accessibility to become more developed, for example, in the future, has already been established under OO, that there is a method for it to become safer, for it to become more accessible. Therefore, I don't think OG is very much charitable inside this debate. We're able to tell you why the idea of choice in and of itself is going to be more important than the idea of accessibility or the idea of embracing death. But secondly then, on the idea of acceptance of death, but before that, yes.
Test. Okay, so you talk about how exactly this will cater to like only those who can actually afford it and actually has an incentive for it, right? So how exactly do you justify this obsession if obsession manifests itself towards a general mass?
I think I already told you, right? The obsession in itself doesn't come directly or suddenly from the people, but because there is a demand from people who doesn't have a longer lifetime, for example, children who are currently going through terminal illnesses inside the ICU, or women who are currently being shamed for how old they look, or how they are not as beautiful as they are during their prime time and so on. So this obsession in itself comes exactly because there is a shaming culture that comes from society. Therefore, you need a counterfactual to all of that. But secondly then, on the idea of acceptance of death, I think we already told you that the extension of life opens up your acceptance to death, because prolonging your life enables these people to explore more of your life, to feel more content with their body, for example, to spend more time with your family and so on, so that you're able to accept death more and more on. Why is this so important then? Because I think the weighing is then on closure. The fact that you're able to understand your life more better under OO's world, the closure that you get with life is then larger. Therefore, the manifestation to self-satisfaction is also then better under OO's world. I think exactly because people are never going to be granted to the choices to how you want to be born inside this world, then at the very least, the process of you living inside the world and the fact that you're able to have that bigger closure for you to accept the idea of death is then way larger under OO's world. This directly clashes to all the things that OG talks to you about how the obsession is going to crash or destruct the idea of death. I don't think it's going to be the case. Instead, we flip the entire claim. We tell you how the acceptance to death is then way better under OO. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We call up the member of government.
all of us will die, and youthful is a good and desirable experience that most of us will want. So that's a concession debate, something that don't need to be talked that much in a pending debate. So what we're going to say to you that is that company exploits your inherent insecurities for their profit. This is something that we don't want. Exactly because on the idea of option, I think this becomes inherent in their side of the house, because we say self-agency to choose on the option or the benefit and side opposition can only exist when you don't have force that comes in form of obsession that drives your consideration, that making you become so much irrational, right? Opening a position is that one with the same logic that that under the side of the house they say that under a proposition that will shame people that don't do this, meaning that they will also shame the old people that don't do this, even though they want to embrace those kind of age. On the comparison, it's on the vulnerability. Because under the side of the house, they still have coping mechanism. If you are being shamed because you do have these products, at the very least, you are still validated because you have beauty privilege, for example. Under the side of the house, ageism happened, and they don't have the coping mechanism. This is the weighing that becomes so much significant on closing government, right? Secondly, with the logic that people have preference, under the side of the house, exactly people that pursue anti-senescence is the one that exactly wanting and having the rational calculus to actually do that. Under the side of the house, forcing makes people have no rational calculus because the external pressure that keeps on going, right? Third of all, the logic of benefit happens independently without the obsession or the idea of cancer or the idea of people victims of war that needs their health to be prolonged. That happens without the obsession because people will still do that if they think they need those kind of things. So the obsession becomes so much not important in the debate and becomes not the burden on their side of the house because they will not be shamed because they know their parent will still need their children to be prolonged and things like that. We don't think that opening a position can still stand until the end of this debate. But directly with OG, right? I think it's good to say that they talk on the idea of how this is something exactly going to be good because you don't force people. But we question on the idea of process, right? That says this is only privileged people because the logic is that if you have high demand, most likely it's going to be accessible, right? So we're going to fail on the idea of the comparative what will happen in our side of the house when you don't have this obsession, right? Meaning that inside closing government, we're going to fill the gap on the idea of harms on how the obsession exactly creates another vulnerability or the harm in itself, right? We regret the humanities obsession, meaning that you have excessively high demand. Looks like on the media portrayal that says being youthful is so good, you don't want pimples in your face or like another, any old skins and things like that. It's something that is shameful. That's why you need to take certain products. Or how this becomes the narrative that people that is aging is something that is bad. Or how in work field you don't want people that is aging and things like that. Secondly, this is not entirely anti-senescence that's going to be regretted, right? On the idea of this research, that this idea comes after being exploited by companies, which means this is something the most important in this debate. Lastly, this makes you have less demand on our side of the house, right? Where is the obsession to anti-senescence harmed on the level of ageism, right? We say on the idea how does obsession looks like when you're obsessed. Youthful is everything. It is shameless to have not smooth skin or old skin, using youth models in every kind of campaigns, emphasizing on age in any manner. In the media and social media campaigns, for example, to have a good age or in advertisements and whatsoever that also manifest in a societal interaction that looking youthful is good, why your face is now aging and what products that are you using and things like that. Where it came from companies' business model to exploit humans' insecurities on age, which becomes manipulative because it inherently something that should not be controlled or something that is uncontrollable that they exploited for the sake of the profit, right? That is being amplified in the narrative to be glorified that aging is something that is bad for the sake of the profit. Yes, When you concede that there is always going to be demand, how is it when you regret that your process can be safer and when you concede that there is demand, it's going to be safer. When the problem is not safe, it's the problem of the option, right? But what's exploited? Insecurities for things you cannot control on the idea of narcissism that you always need for validation to fit the standard or not, you're going to be outcased that. Or afraid of being different to fit in because you avoid discrimination because of age that comes from physical features and things like that, right? Inherently something you are being forced because of the obsession that comes, being used to profit, to having the price of purchase of serum anti-aging pills on the medical procurement, for example, then shouldn't be people's weariness, right? What is this inherently bad? The manipulation leads to people
having these kind of ageism, discrimination by age, looks like if you're aging, you shouldn't be taking any jobs because you most likely going to be weak. Why this comes something that is likely? Because the narrative shapes that youthful is everything, that people will always be obsessed to be youthful, right? The narrative that you're incapable, that you don't have access, that happen after the obsession, which means it's going to be bad because this vulnerability is something that have no opt-out mechanism. They're you losing job opportunities, for example, undermining their work even though they still need the need of economic capital and things like that, right? The manipulation gaslight them to always need to use the product even though the preference is not always that. The way is simple, right? This isn't the world that exactly we want exactly because the force in itself, or it is also an illusion that it is an ultimate alternative, that you need shortcut that's highly important to be youthful. Because we say it's more like under the house because of the obsession, and you're trying to exploit those profit for this company by cutting off other option for embracing healthy lifestyle, for example, to prolonging your life and things like that. I think this kind of comparative will not happen under the of the house because what you want to do is only exploit on the idea of this business model, which means people most likely cannot choose anything that they want. Even people still wanting in both sides of the house to be youthful or to be healthy or prolong life, but the option on what they can choose is less likely to be happen in the rest of the house because you're limiting option, people are unable to actually weigh which option that suits them the best, right? But in comparative, you don't want this to be manipulated. It will not be as much, meaning that you have less demand. People that that have the interest, that have access, will still access that anyway. So it doesn't necessarily mean when you have cancer, you're going to be shamed. Things like this will not happen, but it's most likely going to be done by rational calculus, or how you're going to accepting those kind of aging, right? Because in the house, they're going to say the moment you're obsessed, that means being having aging is something that is shameful. We don't think this is the case because we want people to just accept aging in some cases, that this is going to be embraced on the idea of body positivity in feminism. I think that exactly contradicts on the movement in the of the house, right? What we say in the comparative in the of the house, they have opt-out mechanism to validate themselves, even though people will shame them for having these products. But the beauty privilege and anything or validation within the internal of themselves, it still exists, but these old people do not have the coping mechanism, right? Or you're just simply shifting the narrative if they're old, meaning that they already raised their kids well, or how on the war they already have the struggle and giving contribution to the country. I think the narrative can still be shifted for all these reasons, proving you why option has to be inherently happen under us of the house, not forcing these people propose.
Thank you very much, Member of Government. Reminder, please use the mic for POI, because otherwise it won't be heard through the stream. We call Member of Opposition.
Two questions first before I start. One, I assume I don't have a say and consent towards this, right? Great. And secondly, is there like any timer I can see? Really sorry, autistic can't do without a timer yang nunjukin ke aku. Okay. Sure. Thank you. Death is a terrifying mistress, and human fears it inherently. All themes we think are too external, focusing on arguing on the outcomes of anti-senescence, such as ageism in CG, beauty standards in OG, or accessibility in opening opposition. This falls when you imagine that all of it can happen at the same time in different contexts, in different countries, in different types of society. We'll argue a principal approach as to why humans, regardless of whether or not the outcome is good, is justified to be obsessed with defying death. We think we should take a look at this from the humanity perspective, right? We want advancement, we want betterment, but we are also a fickle being. We fear death, we fear something that we cannot control. In that sense, we are a primal being. A few characterizations.
We think when we're talking about obsession in the context of anti-senescence, this is not an output-based debate. We keep doing the research, we try for betterment on that research, we do it because we're scared of the alternative, which is we're gonna die a scary death, right? Which is why humans are basically reactionary towards the idea of something that they don't know. Gonna try and bring two things here. Firstly, primal fear of being old, death, and remembrance, and why humans are always justified to defy it. One, talking about the source, right? We think death and old age in general is very scary. We don't know what's out there. We don't know what happens after we die. We know that it's permanent. We know it's hard for other people and for ourselves when we respond to another death. We know that we are insignificant in the grand scheme of things. We are just one being in the grand scheme of the world, right? What do we respond to that? We try and prolong our life. We do multiple research for it. We think that this is fine. Why is that so? A response to death will always be justified no matter what the context is. Approximation to other source of death, such as war, such as crimes, whatever it is not relevant, such as OG, will I would argue, because regardless of this research being a point of obsession, one, other research still exists to prolong all of these other contexts, but secondly, irrespective of this existence of the research, war still happens, you cannot stop it with just removing this obsession. But also, the effect of the research is uncontrollable, right? In government, the idea of beauty standard and accessibility is too external, but the issue is that regardless of whether or not this happens, this is not something that is controllable just because you remove the obsession. In some societies, people will have different types of beauty standards, and it's going to be accessible to different types of society. Therefore, this is something that is irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. But what is the action of defying that inherently? It is an inherent instinct of people to defend themselves from something that is uncontrollable. This is an effort from a fickle species to take control of something that is not theirs. This is what our effort to leave a mark on the world that we live in and prolong this life for them on earth, right? But this death is always inevitable. We concur to that from all teams, right? This is why it's justified to inherently prolong it at the end of the day. You are not going against the natural order. You still die no matter what. You find a way to slip in a few more years, sure, look younger, more youthful. This is what makes us happy. We don't understand how an implication to research obsession and to how people will always constantly want it, right? We think the idea of researching and being obsessed with the idea of finding a way to defy death does not implicate that the society will always want it, right? This is just a primal fear, but more so than that, this is something that is done for the sake of our happiness and for the sake of our fear that we have. But what does this argument give to you, judges? It provides you a justifiable and controllable principle. Both opening is contingent on the outcome of the anti-senescence. So much externalities, whether or not it works, people want it, whatnot, right? This gives you that irrespective of what happens after the research, we are still justified to do so because this is our human primal response to do something that we cannot control and to take back control of what is ours, our life, right? Second thing I'm going to try and bring is that human obsession with anti-senescence is an obsession for progress, and this is good. A few contextualizations first. Take a look at the space race, take a look at the industrial era, take a look at, let's say, the AI boom right now. The only thing that are similar in this is twofolds. One, we want to leave a mark on Earth, but secondly, we want a betterment for humanity, something that is good for them and something that is either accessible or at the very least, when people who are actively using it, they can remove some of hardship doing it, right? Is this the same thing with anti-senescence? We think that this is a yes. The same way we want to prolong life is the same way that we want to prolong our mark and leave a massive mark at the same time. As a species, we want to give the picturization that we can beat death. This is a primal need and also at the same time a primal fear of the death, right? Taking back control the only way we can. Our opening talks about our opening talks about that when you are obsessed with it, we process that better, right? Irrelevant, because you'll die anyways. A reactionary being such as humans, looking at their dead grandma, both 50 or 20 years more in the future, will still process it badly, because that is their loved ones. This is irrespective of the responses towards death. But look at the idea of how humans cannot take control of death when they pass. This is the only way for us to take control of something that is consistently malicious to us. That always either takes away someone from us or take away us from someone that we love, right? This will always be malicious. But also notice how this is a direction of development. As humans, that's our only way to defy and to define ourselves. One, we ensure we keep developing, but secondly, we try for the betterment of our people as a society, right? So, what does this do? This is the only thing we can do. An obsession is justified when the counterfactual is something that is not within our control. Progress is something inherent to humans, and this is something that we need to protect and do, right? So if all teams want to talk about whether or not this is something that outcome-wise is good or bad, the problem here, therefore, they have to control whether or not the outcome is bad, but irrespective of that, what they're trying to unjustify or justify is whether or not the obsession comes forth towards a good outcome, right? We think this is irrelevant to the debate. We cannot argue that obsession is only justifiable on the ends of the means. We think the justification here comes from the inherent fear of the human, and that is something that needs to be considered. One last thing to compare. We think in terms, just gonna say to the judges, we think that to judge this debate, you have to understand all teams' implications towards the debate. We think both opening is basically irrelevant in a way that they are talking about something that is extremely not related to the motion and only related to the idea of whether or not anti-senescence and the outcome of it is relevant towards a general society and whether or not it can help such as movements in opening opposition or whether or not it is justified when other sources of that happens in opening government. This is irrelevant to the research. But we think you should also at the same time kick closing government or at very least prioritize closing because we are the only one talking about a principled level as to why humans are justified to do this. Therefore, we are proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. We call the government whip.
Trigger warning. Everything I'm going to talk about is not my own idea. Maybe. Test. Okay. Isn't it sad that you're helping others people from an arson, for example, and now you're having a broken face? Or you're working 24/7 in the field and now you have a wrinkle in your face. But instead of getting appreciation, people say that you're not beautiful enough. Everything that you have done is useless because you're not beautiful enough. You look still old or something along those lines, right? Instead of saying that you should embrace everything, embrace happiness, embrace death, I might be too old for this, I'm okay with that. I think everything that coming from government side of the house is an equity violation, right? Because regardless of the principality that they brought to you, they force people to always embrace all of these things that guilt-tripping people to always be better. Remember that this motion talking about a natural cells movement, natural changes of human cells. This exists in the context slide. It means this technology is forcing people to always say and refuse their natural life being as a human and say that you should seem this younger, like a 20, even though you're 40 years old or something like that. I don't understand why they say that people want to live longer. Every people want to live longer. But the idea is not on the principality of the obsession or anything. We are talking about the process as to why, how people will enter. We are going to the war or anything. This shows to you that will always be someone that is so vulnerable that will be targeted by this mechanism in and of itself. No opt-out mechanism, because you will always say that like this. Instead of saying that embracing, because under outside the house, we do not want people to be obsessed. So there will be no researches to this. There will be no changes. These bad people, for example, to guilt trip these particular vulnerable people who do not have any stable mental situation, for example, or something along those lines. Let's go to every argumentation that is brought to this debate. I'll be engaging to the closing government first. They brought a product in and of itself, right? This is something that's bad because at the end of the day, there is no any coping mechanism in and of itself. Even though you try to develop technology or something like that, remember that human are filthy being. They will always try to be pragmatic. Regardless of how far the technology that you have met, there will always be a gap in it. The rich people will always get a better technology or a better things they get exactly because they have a more money, for example, to more plastic surgery, to more better product in and of itself. But right now, for example, they might create a better or, for example, more accessible things to the poor people, but exactly it's not as good as this particular people. It means, that being said, there will always be gap in the very good case scenario that accessibility exists in the both sides, closing government and closing opposition, and also opening opposition. Means there is no any certainty in their argumentation, right? They are too dismissive that saying there is no output that is needed, or in opening opposition that say that there is no need for us, for example, to care about these things, just let people be afraid, or there is no any argumentation that says that just because people have this mechanism, for example, now they have the satisfaction, people suddenly have embracing their own self in and of itself. Underside the house comparatively, we might have a really long time, for example, for humanity to embrace this ugliness, for example, not so beautiful or anything. But exactly because it is good. Because now, for example, feminism, for example, instead of focusing of the for human as to embrace their beauty, for example, they just, for example, solving the pay gap, for example, women are forced to be not to be forced as a housewife, for example, or something along those lines. This is important because exactly the idea that coming from opening opposition, for example, says that feminism is important, but the idea is they bring double burden to the feminism in and of itself under the side of the house by explaining that now, not just only, for example, feminism has to topple down all this, for example, Unilever product, for example, they force people to use a certain anti-aging things, for example, just for the sake of beauty. Now they, for example, also have to force other things. Remember that feminism always have a limited resource. It is important for us to make a huge budget. I think in terms of efficiency and the sustainability of a movement like feminism, it is far better underside the house. This is toppled down not only argumentation from the opening opposition and closing opposition, but also explain to you what is far better underside the house when people are giving an option, for example, to just embracing all of these things. Because embracing is something that is more acceptable, something that is more approachable instead of this particular product, because you have to, for example, spend your disposable income, for example, for this particular product. Instead of, for example, you're just embracing it. Why embracing it? Something that is far more achievable. First, we have the religion, for example, for you to rationalize things, right? They say that this life is so harsh, this life is so limited, let's just embrace this. Living in this life, for example, is a misery and the happiness only exists in the heaven, for example. There is a leeway actually for human to rationalize all this pain of living in a short time, for example, living in an ugly place, for example, by saying that this life is already be so misery and I will be doing this particular good, not blaming people, not bullying people, for example, for I will belong to the heaven or something like that. It is something that's more acceptable because it is only relying for example, to your trust, for example, and your devotion to the religion instead of buying a certain product that might not be accessible for every people on the ground. Remember that in every ages, for example, regardless of the beauty standard in and of itself, it will always rely on one thing. You should look like as young as possible. Pedophile things that exist in the patriarchal things will be prolonged under their side of the house. We're so proud to propose.
Thank you very much. To close the debate, let's call the opposition whip.
There might be some kind of triggering context in my speech, but it doesn't represent my personal view. Oh, why am I stuttering? This debate is very a deadlock. All of the teams talking about the externalities and how this research will lead into kind of creating a new vulnerability, and how this will create freedom of choice for people, and how this will create that people are just generalizing things and life and blah, blah, blah. We think this is not the case, right? I mean, like, what we should talk about is whether or not this motion answer the human's primal fear of for being old, die, and forgotten. Secondly, whether or not this motion supports humans' nature to develop in terms of technology, healthcare, and beauty. But it's in the internal level of the human. So we're not talking about any kind of things the opening and also closing government talks about in this debate. But firstly, you should understand this. Why CO win this debate? Firstly, this debate shouldn't talk about harm versus benefit, as well as this being seen from the opening government to the closing government debate about and of this anti-senescence only and only that. If you take a close look of the debate, we are talking on a personal level, as in what is happening inside the human's brain to make them so obsessed with this anti-senescence. CO is the only team who talks about it. You should understand that the prerequisite of all benches' argument about harm versus benefit of anti-senescence is our case. Secondly, how to overcome the fear is to face the fear itself. None of the benches in this debate talks about it properly. CO gives you mechanism on how to face the fear on how to face the fear of that. You're not quote unquote puss in boots who lost at the face of the death. You should face it. You should make it for the greater good. You should make it for the other people. So if you take a look in terms of historical period, like that one particular dynasty in China who are so obsessed with being young and so afraid with death and whatsoever it is, he traveled the world to find the cure, to find the medicine, to make sure that he could live long, but eventually he'll die, sure. But then, because of his invention, he helps a lot of people. He helps that, oh, now you can cure sickness with this. For example, you can cure sickness with this medicine, and then you could just maybe you could use natural ingredients and whatsoever it is, right? So compare OO to CO is that on our side, this obsession, even if you don't have the capital, or maybe even you're not privileged enough, whatsoever it is, this obsession will lead you to find the things. Will lead you to make sure that, oh, you get the way. If you really want it, you will find the way. That's the basic premise of this debate, right? Now, compare to CG. They're so afraid about they're so afraid about being exploited and whatsoever it is, right? I mean, if it is in personal level of obsession and whatsoever it is, you could find an alternative that is basically existing in your surroundings. You could just, or maybe if you want to make sure that you could just cheap product, sure. If you want to use natural product, sure. If you just want to drink jamu, sure. Whatever. Do what makes you happy, and the happiness part is the most important parameter in this debate, right? There, just give you a fear-mongering mechanism on our side. We give you alternative on how to manage the harm versus benefit, and how you would overcome the fear itself, right? Now, the reasons why people is so afraid with that is because they don't want to be forgotten. They think that, oh, once I'm dead, that the memories that I would have is will long gone, and people will forget about me and everything about it, right? We think that this could be mitigated. This could be mitigated alongside with your search for a way to with this anti-senescence thingy, right? So compared to CO to OG. On their side of the house, it's very externalities. It is very externalities about the research and whatsoever it is. The prerequisite of someone who wants to do the research is because they are aware they know that that something is basically happening in the status quo. Something is basically quote unquote making a fuss in the society and community and whatsoever it is, right? And therefore they have the relatability, and now they become so obsessed with it, and now they're doing the research. So we're not talking about the externalities on how this will create a bit standard or whatsoever it is, right? Human will eventually die, but now as also you need to understand that the idea of accepting the death, as they mentioned on the DLO, but not well executed, I'm going to take this into my benefit. The idea of accepting the death is being accessible on our side only because you realize. You need to realize it, you need to face it, you need to embrace it. Therefore, you need to embrace it. Therefore, you need to really realize it. Therefore, like supporting the obsession is the only mechanism, is the only mechanism for you to make sure that it's for the betterment. It's for the betterment of the people and for the society itself. Now, how you weigh this debate on the closing opposition? Which side can give a bigger magnitude of impact towards the society? On our side of the house, it's very clear that you accept and you do it for yourself at first, but then people will realize, people will see you, and just a quick note, you should understand that on the closing government side, there is a stance on their case, right? Firstly, they're saying that, there will be a beauty standard and blah, 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 and then you will be exploited by the company and whatsoever it is, but then they want people to accept them as it is. I mean, that won't happen in the end of the day. When you open Instagram and you see those pretty celebgrams, you will get addicted and you will get influenced that you want to be like them and whatsoever it is, right? On our side of the house, sure, if you see that Karin being your role model because she is so pretty, go for it, slay, whatever. Now, this is the thing that cannot be catered on the side of the house, and it can be catered on our side of the house. Proud to CO.
All right, thank you very much for the debate. We can all wait outside while we deliberate.